Welcome back to the Lanterne Rouge Cycling Podcast with Benji Naesen. This is our Giro d'Italia Super Sunday show, partnered with Le Col. You know by now, Le Col is the quickest, fastest growing cycling kit manufacturer in the world. They produce road cycling performance apparel only. You'll be familiar with them already because they provide the kit worn by Bayern McLaren, the pro peloton. They work with McLaren closely, optimizing that kit in the wind tunnel, the TT kits, etc., and the road kits, making sure they're as fast as possible, and that flows down to you, the consumer. If you want to check out their kit, you can find them at www.lecol.cc. The link is in the description of the YouTube video for this pod and the podcast show notes. Go and check out the deals they've got on at the moment. But I'm going to be honest with you guys about the Super Sunday and girls. Benji and I had to divide and conquer between some of the races, so some of us, that's the only way we were going to actually be able to focus on them properly and provide some accurate takes. So, 4 races today: Giro Stage 8, Gent-Wevelgem men and women, and Paris Tour. 3 World Tour level races on the one day. Just brutal. But on to Giro Stage 9 from San Salvo to Roccoraso. 208 kilometres long, pretty flat. Then they did the Passo Lanciano, 12.4 k's at 7%, and then this staircase climb for the last 90 kilometres, including the Passo San Leonardo, not very steep. Bosco di Sant'Antonio, again, not very steep. Both of them were 4% and 5%. And then the last climb to Roccoraso was about 10 k's at 4.5%. But it did have a bit of a muro at the end, quite a steep finish. So we didn't think there was going to be big GC gaps today. The climbs were just not hard enough. If people are climbing at like 25 k's an hour, the effect of a draft, especially with the headwind that was there today, just makes it virtually impossible for anyone to get big GC gaps, except for maybe that final climb. And a breakaway did form, Benji, with some names that you thought were going to be there.
Yes, for sure. Firstly, when the race started off, I want to reintroduce that we had 2 picks for the breakaway. I had Guerrero, you had Haig. And if they didn't come to a breakaway, you had Fulsang. But the race started off, attempts by Jack Hicks initially, Samitier from Movistar, Villela from Movistar, Narvaez from Ineos, Simon Pelot again from Androni, Joseph Cherny, Matt Holmes of yesterday as well. So the names you would expect, we thought Haig would go into the breakaway because Simon Yates is gone and that team has Hamilton high up in GC, or at least on 2 minutes in GC, while Haig is pretty far down already and could have the freedom of going in the breakaway. For a tiny bit, it looked like that, but that group got caught again. The official ticker of the Giro said that Nibali was in that group, but I sincerely doubt Nibali was attacking so early on in the stage. Gotta keep in mind, though, this is already like after 80 kilometers, because for the first 80 kilometers, no breakaway formed. And this group was taken in again. And the moment we started at Passo Lanciano is when we have the actual breakaway of the day, with the likes of Ruben Guerrero, Warbass, also Ben O'Connor, and Castroviejo. Those were the initial 4. But after quite a bit of climbing, we saw that the others that grouped up towards that breakaway was Franchini from Groupama FDJ, also Sepulveda of Movistar, and Giovanni Visconti for Vini Zabu. So a breakaway of a solid 7 riders, and not even the bad ones, because Castroviejo is on 6 minutes and a half in GC. So as you can expect, the moment that the gap of that breakaway started hitting 6 minutes and a half, the Koenig started pacing in the peloton to try and control the pace, to try and keep that gap on 6 minute 30, so that Almeida does not have any issues this stage. And when it comes to GC, it certainly looked like that. Now, in the breakaway, Guerrero, I'm happy to say that that was my pick. So I believe that he was one of the stronger climbers to get with Castroviejo. I was a bit scared of Castro, but the difference between those riders is Castro can pace at a certain level of watts, but doesn't really have that acceleration, while Guerrero does have that acceleration and potentially needs a bit more of accelerations than just pure watting, because at a certain point, when there were still 5 people left in the group, we saw Ruben Guerrero actually getting dropped from the group, which was a bit to my surprise. And he got dropped because he was with someone else that didn't take over, and they kind of played it out a bit, and then Guerrero bridged to the front four again. So eventually, no harm done. And in that breakaway, we saw slowly but surely that we had two riders that came out on top. Warbass, nope, not Warbass, what am I saying? Guerrero and Castroviejo. And this all happened on, you've got the Roccaraso finish, like you said, with that wall at the end, but there's a bit of a plateau section in the middle. Basically, everybody except for Guerrero and Castroviejo dropped at the starting section, and only those two riders were hitting the last portion of the race, which is that ramp at the end. But what happened there?
Yeah, and it was Castroviejo pacing constantly for Guerrero. I guess he might have been a little bit concerned about attacks coming out of the peloton. The gap was like 6 minutes, but then Trek had been pacing and Sunweb had paced, and then I think Lucas Hamilton attacked out of the peloton with Tergag and Hart, maybe eating into that gap, bringing it down to a minute. So maybe that's why Castroviejo felt compelled to sort of keep setting pace. But Guerrero sat on for 90% of this climb, I think. And Castroviejo was just in full super domestique mode, like we saw him in the Tour de France for Ineos. And they got to the wall, and predictably, it played out as we expected. Guerrero just kicked past Castroviejo in the wet when it got pretty steep, even though Castro was trying his best to close out his line on the front through those sort of a bit of a chicane. But Guerrero won incredibly easily. He was able to start celebrating like 55 meters from the finish, pointing at the line, etc., and posting up and enjoying the win. So kind of gifted from Castroviejo, but he's hampered by the fact that he probably doesn't have much acceleration. And I mean, yeah, I think he did work too much, to be honest, Castroviejo. He could have played a bit more cat and mouse. He didn't really play any cards today, to be honest, in the final climb. He just, I think his best chance of winning was to ride absolutely full on the hardest parts of the climb and empty the tank so that he wouldn't even have any form of sprint left, and hope Guerrero would drop, because if it came down to the wall, Guerrero was way too strong. We saw Guerrero come second in the Vuelta stage behind Kuss last year. He won whatever kick it was in that steep finale there, 38 seconds behind Kuss, but ahead of the other riders that were in that break with him. So, yeah, congrats to Benji. He picked Guerrero. It's pretty difficult to pick a breakaway winner like that yesterday. So, we got one thing to ask you guys and girls. If you enjoy the podcast and you think we have good picks, etc., just share it to one other person you think would like it. I guess it's free to do, and it helps us out immeasurably. If you all did that, it would double the listenership, and it would make a massive difference, because Benji's picks are on fire right now. And were you surprised, Benji? Were you pinching yourself, or were you like, yes, I'm a genius, I knew this would happen?
I did internally flex after the race, not gonna lie, but in general, I'm always happy that my picks turn out somewhat okay. We had Carretero in the first week on that one stage where Ghana won that came very close, and I felt like he was gonna take it, and it was kind of disappointing that he didn't. So I'm kind of happy that this is a bit of a resurgency that my pick is valid this time around. So I'm happy with it. And to be honest, with the podcast, I think we're at at least 75% of the stages somewhat correctly guessed, and that's kind of fun as well, because that shows us that the time we put into cycling also delivers something of knowing stuff about it. So it's always fun to have that. But gotta be honest, Guerrero, I didn't expect him to actually start fighting for the KOM points either. And he actually took every single point along the way. And Guerrero is now leader. Took over from, who was it? Ghana still in the lead? Or Visconti took over? I don't know. One of the two had it. And Visconti's now second on 76 points. That is 8 points lower than the Guerrero's 84. So the battle for KOM is totally on. It's totally different than in the Tour de France. In the Tour de France, Cosnefroid was wearing it and nobody bothered for it. Now people actually fight for it every stage, and I find that amazing. It's a very different system. The climbs are not that logical when it comes to category. We've spoken about it a lot, but I feel like it's a different take on climbing or a KOM jersey, because they probably select the climbs and decide based on that how important it would be if you come on top on this climb. And it's not necessarily the larger the climb is the most important one. I feel like they're trying to make it more strategic to try and get the KOM jersey. And I kind of like it that way because we've seen much more leaders than in the Tour de France, and they're basically all better climbers in my honest opinion. So maybe I'm a bit harsh for Kosnefort. Definitely, as he wrote, amazing in by Tour today, but we'll speak about that later on. I don't know. Do you feel like the KOM jersey is a better system with these odd KOM categories, or do you find that just annoying to watch?
No, I think it's better. It doesn't really make any difference to me whether a climb is a Cat 2 or a Cat 1 because we actually look at the gradient and the length of the climb. I can decide for myself how difficult a climb is regardless of whatever it's categorized as. And I do like it is kind of stupid if someone gets in a break in the Tour de France and there's 2 Category 1 long climbs that the breakaway is allowed to do really, really easy and someone just mops up loads of KOM points. That isn't really the best climber. It doesn't really make sense earlier in the race. And the KOM competition was an afterthought, really, in the Tour this year. So I like what's happening in the Giro. It's heating up to be really good, as well as the points classification. And, of course, Ineos are leading the team's classification and Movistar a fair way down. That's obviously pretty important. But back to what was happening in the peloton. We said this yesterday. I think Benji said in the preview show. Yes, Hamilton, I think, attacked out of the peloton that was chasing, or they weren't really chasing, to be honest. I think Trek were trying, and then they realised they only had Brambilla on the front. And like when they let Fabro go on Etna, I think Brambilla was pulling quite hard, and the riders behind him were like, nah, we're not really following you. And that's the problem with Nibali not being second wheel on Brambilla's wheel. So the pace wasn't that high on the final climb, and Sunweb had a lot of riders there too. So that was a concern for Trek, in case Kelderman, who's looking really good and is a genuine second favourite right now in the betting markets for the Giro overall, maybe they were a little bit concerned that, on a finale that doesn't really suit Nibali, which we called out in the preview, and yesterday they didn't want to make the pace too high. So it was Gegenhardt and Hamilton who attacked. I think Gegenhardt actually gained a little bit of time on GC, but he's like 2 minutes 40 back still. He gained like 2 places. He came, after the breakaway, he was like 13 seconds ahead of Hamilton, who he attacked with. But the big move today, it wasn't really that big, was Kelderman, Fulsang, and Hindley. So they attacked. I think it was Fulsang initiating it. We knew this was going to happen. Sort of punchy finish like this. He's better than Nibali at. He immediately got a gap to Nibali, and he went with Jai Hindley. And Jai Hindley at Herald Sun Tour, you go and watch my Herald Sun Tour video with Seb Berwick and watch those two going toe-to-toe on quite a steep finale in Herald Sun Tour. I know this is Giro and Herald Sun Tour is not the same level, but just if you want to go and see what sort of riders they are doing it in previous races so you can get more familiar with them. Hindley, pretty good result from him, coming 10th on the stage, but with the GC guys of Kelderman and Fulsang, who put 3 seconds into Micah and Conrad, and about 10 seconds or so, 10, 12 seconds into Nibali, who couldn't follow them on that final climb. And was losing seconds pretty quickly, but still 10 to 12 seconds in the grand scheme of things. Not massive, but what did happen was Kelderman moved ahead of Bilbao on GC because Bilbao lost a fair bit of time. Arn van Orca moved down to 7th. Fulsang moves up to 6th. 4 seconds now behind Vincenzo Nibali. Pozzovivo moves up to 4th. Yeah. Does this change anything that you think about GC, Benji, what happened on this finale, or was it just a few seconds here or there? It doesn't really move the needle for you?
I don't think it really moves the needle, but it does give me a confirmation on Kelderman. And he's been having a plethora of bad luck in his career when it comes to Grand Tours and crashes and just being sick and so forth at the end of a Grand Tour. So he always had bad luck in that sense. Got some top 10s, if I recall correctly, maybe a top 5 somewhere in the Vuelta, but I'm not sure about that. But in general, I feel like this might be the Giro where he can strike through that. But we've got some hard stages to come. But he's got a time trial. He is able to have a better time trial than Nibali on paper. But then again, that doesn't mean much at the moment, considering, imagine if the forecast of the winds changes again mid time trial. So let's talk about that the day before that. But I feel like he might be on his way to get a podium here, and that's a rider I would not have put on the podium before the Giro. While in Tirreno, I already said that I would put him in the top 5 position, though, because he showed that he is able to do that. He is pretty good in these kind of climbs, so I'm just waiting to see what he can offer on the last week, because that's going to be the most decisive section. But he's also got the best team to me, personally, because wow, I just murdered that name. Jay Hindley, is that how you pronounce it?
Jai Hindley.
Jai Hindley,
Get
okay.
it right.
Thank you very much.
You listen to how hard I try with the Belgian and Dutch names? You kidding me?
Wow, I just said it wrong
Wout
again.
Van Aert, and you can't do Jai Hindley.
Jai Hindley. We've got Michael Matthews, who was working for Kelderman today. We also have basically Sam Ullman, who had a weaker day today, but then again, he was working quite well as well. So I feel like Sunweb might be the better mountain team quite unexpectedly here. So that's pretty cool to see some upsets in that. And I can't wait to have a bit of a rest day as well in the Giro, because today was a heavy day with all the other races. But yeah, tomorrow's a rest day.
Yeah, I'm pretty stoked for that. By the way, the ticker wasn't lying, Benji, when it said Nibali got in that break with Haig. That actually happened. There's photos of it. Haig just put it on Instagram, and yeah, he's saying that's why their breakaway failed, because Nibali was following the break Haig was trying to get into. So, fuck Nibali. And no, I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. I just want Haig was my pick for today's stage. So Nibali, who obviously is Benji's favourite rider, closing down the Haig move meant that Sunweb had to follow, and Benji's pick Guerrero won. So Benji 1, me 0, or Benji probably 5 at this point. But that was Giro Stage 9. Been a great first 9 days, although the last couple of stages have been a bit boring. Not a great weekend for the Giro in comparison to their previous stages, which have been really exciting. But yeah, I can't wait for what keeps happening. It doesn't really matter to me how strong the field is, etc., as long as there's exciting racing, and I can't wait to see what Kelderman can do, even if we don't have Stelvio or something, which actually is looking kind of like it might happen. Even on Mortirolo, what can he do against, say, Kruijswijk and Vincenzo Nibali? But yeah, that was our Giro wrap-up. We'll have our rest day recap of the whole first week tomorrow, and thanks for Lacole, as always, for partnering with us for our Giro podcast. On to the big one-day race of today, Gent-Wevelgem, the men's race first. Stacked start list. You probably already listened to our preview. MVDP, Wout Van Aert, Mads Pedersen, Bettiol, etc. The list goes on and on. It's had a few sprinters, Sam Bennett and Caleb Ewan lining up. And yeah, it starts in Ypres. It goes through a lot of the World War sites that I've been to. It's sort of very historic place in the world, in Northern Europe. Starts in Ypres, finishes in Wevelgem. 233 kilometers. First half is pretty much flat, and then they get into some reps of short climbs. Schelpenberg. Benji, can you please take over for these climbs?
Wiedenberg? I'm guessing that's it. I don't have a profile open, so...
Barneberg, Monteberg, I just needed the other one, and Kemmelberg I can do as well. So they're short cobbled climbs. The really decisive one is the Kemmelberg for some reason. It's not the steepest, but it just seemed to be, even in the women's race, that's where the race got split a couple of times. I think maybe because it's cobbled, and yeah, now that Paris-Roubaix has been cancelled, we've got to make the most of these cobbled races, and certainly Gent-Wevelgem men delivered. And I watched this race pretty much full to the exclusively, and I didn't really watch the Giro stage. But where did you join in, Benji, and who was in the break at that point, and who was, I guess, chasing in the peloton?
Basically, I joined in when it started, the coverage, and it really annoys me that they covered us so late, because the Gent-Wevelgem exists out of a flat part at the start going through the Moeren, which is a portion of West Flanders, and that area is known for having a clear possibility for echelons. There's always so much wind there, and today it was definitely the same. Apparently, there was plenty of wind, and the peloton, split into 3 groups before the race even broadcasted. But luckily for the viewers, they didn't really miss anything because the group just came together just before the broadcast. So nothing really major happened because of that. And I think the only notable thing is that a few crashes happened, including the likes of Oliver Naesen, who had some injury marks at his back by falling on his back. So I wasn't expecting too much after seeing that, because he apparently fell on the same knee that he fell on Bing Bang Tour. But then again, a few stages later, he won something. So potentially a few days after this might be a bit of a lucky side towards the Tour of Flanders. But anyway, let's continue onwards. The breakaway. A very interesting breakaway, because one rider I did not really expect in there, but loved that he was in there. First of all, Alexis Ducoujar from HDZL Mondial, Konischev from Mitchelton, Leonardo Basso from Ineos Grenadiers, Maurice from BVC. I've got no clue what that team is. BNB Vital Concept? Probably. Molly for Wallonie-Bruxelles, and De Wilde for Sport Vlaanderen. And the final rider, Mark Cavendish, the Manx Missile for Bahrain McLaren. I genuinely was happy to see that, because I like seeing old people in breakaways, as in all the legends of the sport, just doing stuff that might not be in their way, but they're doing it just because they're at the end of their career, most likely pretty soon. And Cavendish doesn't have a contract yet, so he has to show himself to hopefully do something about that. And I think he was in negotiations with Bahrain a few days ago, so potentially that was to be a domestique or something in the coming years, because it sounded like that. But one thing that I noticed all out the parcours is that Flanders Classics, the organizers of Gent-Wevelgem, are basically the only organizers that I've seen in a long while that follow the UCI rule of having barriers at the side of every cobble section to prevent riders from riding on the side. You've got that with the Tyenberg a lot in the Tour of Flanders, that riders keep pacing on the side of the road and not really on the cobbles themselves. And today on the Camelberg, that was perfect, and the riders could not really go off the Camelberg's cobble road structure, and because of that, they couldn't benefit off of that. So pretty cool to see that, to be honest.
Yeah, I agree. It makes a big difference than being forced to ride on the cobbles, and it's definitely safer. And I think the main point to get to here is when there was a very strong group in front with Matteo Trentin, Mads Pedersen, and Stefan Kung. It also had, I think, Vermeersch, 2 Vermeersch brothers as well. I think Cavendish had joined that group somehow. I'm probably missing a couple of riders, but the main ones I want to refer to are Kung, Trentin, Rowe, and Pedersen. And they were clear all the way until the last climb, which is the Camelberg. So you got the last climb with about 35 kilometers to go. Hard cobble climb. It's hard enough for there to be gaps and separations on it. You've got the Banneberg just before that. So in the peloton, I think Quickstep had missed that move, or they didn't have the riders they wanted in that move. So they had Seneschal, Lampard, I think, behind, as well as Askren. Wout Van Aert and MVDP had missed that move, but it really wasn't that big a gap, like 10 seconds or so, and they'd kept it in check, particularly up to those last few climbs. And onto the Camelberg, I think that Kung group with Trentin and Pedersen only had 5 seconds at the most, and it was pretty clear that the peloton was going to catch them. Wout Van Aert moved to the front at the base of the Camelberg, and I think the camera missed it when he really started going, but he launched so hard at the base of that climb and very, very quickly caught that group who had split themselves. I'm pretty sure Kung had attacked with Trentin in his wheel and Pedersen trying to get there midway through the Camelberg, dropping the other riders in that breakaway. So at the same time, you've got the remnants of that breakaway all across this cobbled climb, going really slowly, and then you've got Wout Van Aert going past them at about 1,000 kilometers an hour, trying to get and bridging across to Pedersen, Kung, and Trentin. You've got MVDP, who was like 35th wheel going into the base of the last climb, and then had to make up loads of wheels while Van Aert attacked. He then had to bridge longer. It was the same Brabantse Pijl when Alaphilippe was attacking. Just imagine that same thing again. Costing himself extra watts here and there that he doesn't really need to with poor positioning. And then I think Kung, Trentin, and Pedersen went over the top of the Kemmelberg with a little bit of a gap, but then they got Wout Van Aert bridged them with MVDP, and then really the main race-winning group had formed. And yeah, who was, for completeness, Benji, who was in that group apart from Kung, Trentin, Pedersen, MVDP, and Van Aert? Because I'm sure I'm missing somebody important.
So they had the remnants of that first group that was caught. So the likes of Gujar, Van Mark, and such was still in the group. Rowe, Pedersen as well, Mats Pedersen, Vermeer, Steunissen, Kung, like you said, and the Florian Vermeer as well. But I think he dropped on that third camel. Now, the people that bridged up were Van Aert, Van der Poel, like you say, Seneschal, Bettiol, Asgreen, Degenkolb, and also Lampard, but he joined a tiny bit later than all the rest. But basically, that whole group formed one group after the final Kemmelberg. And we know from the parkour that after the final Kemmelberg, that there's not really much to go off anymore. You've got a pretty flat section into Menen and then finishing in Wevelgem. And there's no real place where you can use the wind or where you can use a bridge or something. It's all based on tactical maneuvers and attacking and trying to respond to everybody and doing that. And there became a very clear pattern in that, because I think with about 8 kilometers to go, there was no real attack yet. Everybody was still pacing together. I feel like throughout the whole race, from the third Camelback onwards to 8 kilometers before the line, I think Van Aert did about like 20% of the work in that group. Either I'm like extremely blind, but I saw Van Aert sometimes do 2 relays at the front. Van der Poel did that once as well, where he just did relays shortly for a tiny bit, and then suddenly he started doing 2 relays in a row, just going off the front, getting in the wheel of the second rider, which was Pedersen, and going to relay again. So it was clear that those 2 riders were the real engines in that group for me. Pedersen, not really pacing as hard as the others, but still doing his portion of the work compared to Bettiol, who was not really doing much at all personally. I think that Van Mark did most of the work there, and that, well, led to, I think, Bettiol being one of the first attackers in that group.
One man had been attacking, that was Stefan Kung. I think he'd attacked and only got caught with about 25 to go. He went off the front. He only ever got like 5 to 6 seconds. Obviously, he's a time trialist. And just reminding everyone of the teams in that group. You got 3 Quick Step, Asker, Lampard, Seneschal. None of them are the strongest sprinters, and probably none of them are the strongest individually either as just pure classics riders compared to the other riders in this group. You've got 2 Education First, neither of whom have got any chance in the sprint, Bettiol and Van Mark. You've got a pure time trialist, Stefan Kung. Trentin, who's just a budget version of Van Aert and Van der Poel, so he's not going to probably beat them in the finish. Mads Pedersen, who I think is the out-and-out quickest man in that group, and I said that before the Tour de France. I said he's like top 5 quickest man just about in the world when I made that video about his underrated sprint. Van Aert and Van der Poel, clear favourites. Everyone's probably looking at them. Van Aert did have a teammate, Mike Turnison, in that group, who I feel like Jumbo-Visma didn't really use him that much. They didn't really play off that extra teammate either. So you've got multiple teams that have multiple riders in that group. All of those teams know that they are not going to beat Wout Van Aert or Van der Poel in the finale, in the sprint. And you've got Mads Pedersen with no teammate, but also no one looking at him to close gaps either, because he's not a race favourite, even though Benji and I picked him yesterday on the podcast. Degenkolb was also in that group, the German for Lotto. Similar situation to Pedersen, but he just doesn't have the kick. But no one's looking at him to really bring back anything or do any work. So it's a difficult situation for Van Aert and MVDP, where you've got such a large group, you've got no real climbs left in the race where you can really put the power down to make a difference, where you can split the group and thin it, like in Ronde van Vlaanderen. You've got riders in that group who they're not scrubs, right? Like Mads Pedersen came second on the Champs-Élysées and Bettiol won Flanders. Like, it's not just, you can't overpower these guys, and yet they're the underdogs, and Quick-Step are Quick-Step are going to attack you. So very, very difficult situation for them, in that group. And as you said, Benji, nothing really happened until maybe the last 7 to 6Ks to go when attacks started happening. But yeah, who was the first major attack from the riders attacking basically Wout Van Aert and Mathieu van der Poel?
Well, I think that there's one attack that Lampaert did at a certain point, but it didn't really lead to anything, not even too much trouble to close it down. But it became clear that they were going to try and attack one by one. And the moment Lampaert got caught, you had on the other side of the road Asgreen move up, and Asgreen was about to attack, but then Bettiol came out of his wheel and surprised him more than Asgreen was surprising anybody else at that moment. And Asgreen decided not to chase that. And Bettiol actually got a solid gap, but the second group started chasing. And I think that it was a Quick-Step rider that closed down Bettiol the first time around. But the majority of attacks after that, I feel like it came down to two riders only. And that's Van Aert and Van der Poel. And that's going to be a nemesis story that we're going to talk about quite a bit in this final section. But what did you feel like was the next very decisive attack in that group?
Well, Van Aert actually attacked, I think, straight after Bettiol. Van der Poel closed him down. And then Stefan Kung had a last-ditch attack, but he was pretty tired, I think. And, yeah, but hats off to Stefan Kung, acknowledging he gave up maybe a fifth or a sixth today. I don't know where he actually finished, but accepting that he can't win in a sprint, so he has to attack early. Then it was Trentin attacking with Bettiol and Seneschal on the wheel. And this is now with 2Ks to go. So Pedersen hadn't closed down anything. Degenkolb had actually closed down a fair few attacks, or at least when Wout Van Aert had sprinted to close down a gap. If it wasn't Mathieu van der Poel on Van Aert's wheel, who I felt like was closing down a lot, it was actually Degenkolb. But it was, Trentin attacking with Bettiol and Seneschal in the last 2.5Ks or so. That was just the last straw where Van Aert had been getting rolled by Kung, Bettiol, etc. in very quick succession. Like, there's no respite for him in this last 5Ks. Mathieu van der Poel had then been closing Van Aert, trying to bridge across to those moves. And then the minute that happens, another attack goes. So this Trentin attack, which was really well timed, and then Bettiol and Seneschal were working with him, was clearly going away. And Van Aert tried to close it. He's trying. He's got Van der Poel on his wheel. He flicks Van der Poel, and it's clear he's got nothing left. And Van Aert wasn't really making much impression on that gap. And Mads Pedersen goes to the other side of the road, starts sprinting, and no one even really saw him actually when he initially attacked across that gap. And 10 million race IQ for Mads Pedersen is obviously, no one was really expecting him to do much work in that group. They were attacking each other, etc. He was able to sit in the wheels and he didn't miss a decisive split, except for this one from Trentin, Seneschal and Bettiol up the road. And he's like, I got to close this as quickly as possible so that I can rest up a little bit for the sprint in the last 200 metres. And he got across pretty easily, Pedersen. Very, very strong from him. And Van Aert and then VDP were looking at each other. So were you surprised, Benji, that Van Aert pretty much accepted with 1,500 metres to go? Van Aert decided, I'm happy to lose the race here. I accept losing the race here because if I close this gap, I'm going to lose in the sprint anyway. So, do you think Van Aert could have done anything different at all in this race, really?
I think he could have responded, but that's not really... it's a difficult situation. I believe that what he did was expected, as in when Pedersen crossed the gap and he saw that nobody was taking over in the second group, he was like, well, I'm not going to do the same thing I did at the World Championships and pace my ass off for a race that I can't win anyway. I've won enough races already. And it became clear that he was angry at Van der Poel as well a bit, or salty towards Van der Poel. We'll talk about it in a second, because he decided to sit up in the group. And he just sticked on the wheel of Van der Poel from that point. It was but like 500 meters to go until like 200 meters to go. He was literally in the wheel of Van der Poel, stuck to it, and he rode to the line in that. Van der Poel obviously knows that, and because of that, you've got a situation where Van der Poel is dropping from the back of the group, Van Aert is in his wheel, and the others can fight it out. And it became clear in the interviews afterwards as well. I don't know. I don't know what I should feel about it. I feel like Van Aert probably could have done more to close the gap to the three riders that got away, but he's been closing every gap so far, and he kind of just misses the decisive one. So maybe it's the Belgian curse that we usually have with the national team, but yeah, it's the one group that he shouldn't have let go away, and definitely not this far in the race, and he's not there. So if you close down like 6 groups beforehand, 6 attacks beforehand, one extra is probably not going to kill you, and you might get closer to a victory. But on the other hand, he's won a lot of races and probably is like, well, if they don't want to work, then they don't win. I've got enough victories, and it looked like that was indeed his feeling afterwards.
But getting on to the actual winner of the race, going into the finale, Seneschal, Trentin, Bettiol and Pedersen. Bettiol probably knew he'd done his dash at that point, attacking a couple of times, and he's not got the best sprint compared to those guys. Trentin starts kicking early, Pedersen on his wheel. Pedersen comes off his wheel, I think, to the right-hand side. Seneschal on the wheel of Mads Pedersen. And then Pedersen opens it up with like 200 to go, and no contest, really. Way too good, way too strong. And yeah, if he's got clear air in front of him and half decent legs with 200 left in a sprint like this against Seneschal, even if Seneschal gets a full draft, like Seneschal didn't even get to the point of overlapping his wheel at all. He even got gapped off the wheel a little bit by Pedersen, and he was able to post up Mads. Unfortunately, not in the World Champs jersey, but taking Gent-Wevelgem. He's still underrated, Mads Pedersen. And it's a shame that all the headlines are about Mathieu van der Poel and Wout Van Aert and whatever. But Pedersen's so good. And he's just someone that is so scary to have in a reduced bunch with you like that. I think he's kind of like, I'm not sure who he's like. Even he's kind of like Peter Sagan as well, because like peak Sagan, because yes, he's not as good maybe at all the other things Sagan did, but if you go to the line with him, I think he's quicker than Wout Van Aert in a head-to-head drag. I haven't really. I need to see it. Maybe that's a controversial opinion, but just the way Pedersen was able to sprint in Nice and then Champs-Élysées, I think he's pretty fast, Mads Pedersen. Maybe it's a wash between the two of them. I think he's definitely quicker than Mathieu van der Poel in a flat sprint. Someone that people kind of sleep on. We knew that yesterday. Benji and I said yesterday, we think there's a possibility Wout Van Aert and Mathieu van der Poel will look at each other. We thought it was more likely that Van Aert would win the race. Not going to lie about that. We thought he was the most likely rider to win it, but the odds on Pedersen, it's just a guy we both thought could win and was much more likely to win than the market suggested. And another big win for him, adding that to his palmares, Mads Pedersen. Let's see how he goes in Flanders this year. Unfortunately, I think that hopefully that will go ahead now that Roubaix has been cancelled. But what was the beef, or is there any beef, Benji? What happened afterwards with the sports interviews with Mathieu van der Poel and Wout van Aert?
So, firstly, Van Aert was getting interviewed, and the initial reaction after the race was, I'm going to try and quote it as best as I can, Van der Poel preferred losing than me winning, and also added to that Van der Poel was only looking at one rider, and that was him, and that he added on to that quote, well, he should know that I've won more races this season, and because of that, I'm not really that bad about losing one extra here just because of this. And it's a quote that could be taken as a bit arrogant, but I feel like I enjoy this drama. Not going to lie, I feel like both of them are pretty class riders usually, and probably Van Aert is also a tiny bit salty, Van der Poel is probably a tiny bit salty, They are the 1v1 that people saw when they were looking at this race. And obviously that's going to create some drama. They've had drama before in the cyclocross seasons, and it's special that they've been riding against each other for 10 years with each other as their main competitors. And I feel like this is the first year in road cycling where that's fully the case. Because last year, I think that there was not really that 1v1 battle between the two, while right now they are the two clear best cobble riders for me personally. And because of that, you've got that automatic nemesis between those two riders. Now, Van der Poel responded to that in the class way that he usually does as well, in the sense of it's a bit low from Wout for saying that, because I always drive to win. So it's a very short statement, but yeah, he just denies that he rode to make Van Aert lose. While I feel like both of them rode to have each other's lose more than winning themselves, which made for a very interesting final. I don't know what your take is on the final regarding those two riders.
No, I don't agree with that. I think Wout Van Aert rode to win the race. I think, yeah, you're right. For like literally the last 1,500 meters, Wout Van Aert was like, enough. I'm not doing anything anymore, and I'm letting the race go up the road. But I think for all the time before then, I think Wout Van Aert was going full for the win. And I think Van der Poel, he wasn't riding to lose. He was just riding in a reactive way rather than Wout van Aert being at the front of the race, closing down moves, maybe one of the moves of his own, attacking on the Kemmelberg, etc. And whereas Van der Poel's the one closing gaps. So, of course, Van der Poel has to close the gap to Wout van Aert. Like, that's ludicrous to say that he shouldn't do that. And if he asks anyone else to do it, they're just going to ask him. They're not going to do it. Mads Pedersen will just rely on Van der Poel closing the gap to Wout van Aert. So he has to. He's damned if he does, and he's damned if he doesn't. I do think maybe he was cooked at the end. He probably should have helped Wout van Aert a little bit sooner when Mads Pedersen and Seneschal and Trentin and Bettiol were up the road, and he didn't pull through. He really only just closed down Wout van Aert. That one was a little bit like, oh, you're racing a little bit to lose there because yeah, Van Aert's not. There's no bluff you're calling. Van Aert is not going to keep pulling those guys back on his own. But yeah, I hope there's more beef and more drama. It'd be great if there was proper drama on the road. I haven't watched all their cyclocross races, but if they were marking each other in cyclocross races in the past, were there any instances where that meant that they both then lost and didn't get on the podium, and someone else went up the forest track or whatever, the circuit, and won? Because that's what sort of happened today. And if Wout van Aert wants to blame anybody, it's kind of himself for not using the climbs effectively to have a manageable group. Because he's going into the final 30Ks with no more climbs, no real way of getting away from those guys, with bronze medal world champs time trialist and a straight up beast, Kung, who can bring back moves. He's got 3 quick step riders, Askren, Seneschal and Lampard, who are beasts in that group. He's got Van Marken and Bettiol Flanders winner. He's got Mads Pedersen, arguably the quickest man in the group, and it's raining. It's been a relatively hard day. He's super fast. He's got him in that group. He's got Degenklob, etc. It's a large group, so he had to know. Well, he's getting into a group like that. They're going to work him over, and Van der Poel too. They're going to. Oh, you disagree?
I disagree a tiny bit, and that's because I think at the third Kemmelberg top that Tönnissen was also in the group, teammate of Van Aert, and I think that it was only with about 25 kilometers to go when someone reacted to that Kung attack or something that Tönnissen dropped from that group because of, well, just the teammates being left behind in a tactical play. As Van Aert was in the front group, he did not respond to the attack, and eventually the gap was too large. And that's also the way Van Marke dropped from that group. So I feel like we can't really say that on the climb itself, he should have gone with a more manageable group, because if Tönnissen was in that front group as well, he probably would not have this problem. But then again, you're also right on the other sense, because he does not have enough riders then, or he has no ability to control the people that are in that front group either. So I think that the best way for Teunissen to be useful here would have been to have him just react to everything for Van Aert and just kill himself for Van Aert. I don't think Teunissen was done when he dropped with Van Marke. He didn't look like it. And I feel if they played that a bit different, you might have a situation where Teunissen is riding more effectively for Van Aert in the last 25 kilometers and can be of play in that last 10 kilometers. So, yeah, I don't know. Maybe I'm overrating or underrating the tiredness on Teunissen at that point, but I feel that if he was in that front group and not with Van Marke, then he could have played a big role in the final to try and counter a bit more and make sure that Van Aert was not really in the situation that he ended up in.
I think that was the plan, but he got dropped when there was a move, like pretty early, and I think he was getting dropped. I don't know, like Rowe got dropped. I don't think he just chose to go back there. I think in the last 5Ks, if you've got attack after attack after attack, it's going to be impossible for Wout van Aert and Van der Poel to manage that. And the riders of this quality, and there were so many of them attacking them, it means they pretty much can't win. And they're always, all the other riders are just leaning on them to close down every other attack. So what they should be doing, or what I guess Van Aert should have done, would be try to thin the group even after the Kemmelberg. Instead of being reactive to attacks in the last 5Ks, which he can't then recover from, even if it does come down to a sprint, he should have maybe tried to thin the group out a little bit more, go clear with, even if he brings Mathieu van der Poel with him. If it's a group of 5, 4 or 5, and there's not 3 quick step, 2 education first, etc., that's just more manageable. Maybe he gets rid of Degenkolb, one of Degenkolb or Pedersen as well. And yeah, I think that would have been more manageable for him. Maybe that wasn't possible, but I still think if a split happened and then Van der Poel... The problem was Van der Poel wasn't really working with him and pulling over him quickly either when that sort of thing did happen, because Van Aert did try to accelerate at some point. So I'm not really being critical of Van Aert. It's just, it is what it is. When you're the favourites, Sagan's been treated like this for years in classics. That's why he hasn't won as many, I guess, monuments as people expected him to, because he's been the heavy favourite for them so often that he gets marked out of the race. And it's going to be really interesting at Tour of Flanders, but Flanders has harder climbs and more of them. So different to Gent-Wevelgem, where it's often a larger group going into the finish. And then the tactics are always so good in this race, particularly like in 2015, because, yeah, you do get these larger groups. But yeah, you got any last thoughts on the men's Gent-Wevelgem, Benji? A classic edition already with so many class riders in that finale.
I loved it, and it was very intriguing until the final. There was a battle within the battle with the Van der Poel versus Van Aert thingy, and just in general, a very good, well-rounded race. It was very interesting from the start as well. We had riders being kind of blown off their bike tiny bit. I think it was Oz or something, somewhere mid-race, but yeah, it was a pretty heroic edition, not like the one where Thomas got blown off his bike, but I really enjoyed it. It's the cobble season really getting re-triggered again, I would say, because we've got the Tour of Flanders coming up. Obviously, Roubaix of the calendar, but I'm so looking forward to the Tour of Flanders, and hopefully it's a very rainy edition to make it as heroic as possible, because I love these cobble races, and it's in my home region, so that adds on to it. But we also had a women's race off Gent-Wevelgem, and I'll throw it to you for that.
Yeah, so Benji had to go back to work for the women's race. He was in charge of Paris Tour, so he'll do Paris Tour afterwards. The women's race, 141 Ks, and a very similar circuit, starting in Ypres, finishing in Wevelgem. And it had the Kemmelberg, Bannerberg, the Dagenberg, Scherpenberg. But the last climb, again, was the Kemmelberg, with about 35 Ks to go. So exactly the same finale as the men, same name as the race as the men's, and also Flanders Classics has the women's race after the men's. And there's a very strategic reason for that, and also the same reason why we have the women's race coverage after the men's recaps and not as a separate podcast, it's in the numbers. The analytics show, even in the TV coverage and the podcasts and the YouTube videos I've done, if you tie them together and have high audience retention and capture that and then put it into the women's race, you will get way more audience for that, for the race or for the podcast or for whatever medium of the women's races. So there is method behind the way Flanders Classics has done it, and we do the podcast. But yeah, the favourites were usually sprinters to have a little bit of a better time in the women's Gent-Wevelgem over the years, like Julianne Dor, she's had a couple of podiums, Bastianelli, Kirsten Wild, who she got pulled out because of a COVID scare, I think, or maybe she tested positive. I don't want to spread fake news, but she pulled out because of coronavirus. I'm not sure whether she had a positive test or not, but she wasn't racing last year's winner, Kirsten Wild. But we thought Sunweb were going to be the strongest overall team with Conor Rivera and Lippert, and then obviously they would be riding for their probably strongest sprinter on the team and strongest pure sprinter in women's cycling, Lorena Wiebes, but Lippert being in the best young rider jersey in World Tour, who's probably better on the climbs than Wiebes. But nothing really happened there was breakaways, etc. They got brought back, but when I tuned in straight after the men's race, I've been watching out of the corner of my eye. It was all together with like 45, 48 Ks to go. Got Trek pacing a little bit, and then slowly increasing the pace as they got into the base of the Kemmelberg, the final ascent, with like 38 Ks to go. Sunweb had been at the front before then. Rivera had been pacing a fair bit for Lippert and just keeping her safe, but no major attacks from Lippert. I thought they were going to play her as a card beforehand and then have Lorena Wiebes sort of sitting on. We thought they'd do that in the men's race as well, Sunweb. But that didn't really eventuate. Trek pacing, they got Dijkman, Ellen van Dijk, very strong in this sort of race, and Elisa Longo-Borghini. They paced and pretty much burnt Audrey Cordon-Ragot. Beforehand, she dropped, I think, before the Kemmelberg had started, and they had them in really good position going into that climb, and they pretty much shredded the group and created a selection of favourites. And it was pretty interesting actually seeing who made it into that group. You got Lotte Kopecky, who had to be a favourite for this race, for the women's race. She's one of the best sprinters at the moment in World Tour. Got Lisa Brennauer, German national champion, pretty decent time trial. Sarah Roy from Mitchelton Scott. Hasn't won a race of this calibre in her career, but a good sprinter. Got Longo-Borghini, Dijkman, and Van Dijk. So 3 Trek Segafredo riders in there, but none of them the best sprinter. Just like when Quickstep had the 3 on their own in the men's race. This is now with 30 Ks to go with the selection after the Kemmelberg. You've got 2 Bulls Dormans riders. Amy Peters, very strong all-round rider, and their sprinter, the Belgian Julianne Dor. So she's done well in this race before. As I said, Lotte Kopecky, probably the pick in that group, is the best pure sprinter. I think she won a Giro Rosa Stage. Pretty sure she's Belgian national champ. Demi Vollering for Park Hotel Valkenburg. Strong rider, but on her own. She was skipping a lot of turns, Demi Vollering. I'm not sure she had the best legs today. She did try something at the end, but yeah, she wasn't really a factor. I think a few more climbs would have actually suited her, to be honest. She looked so good in Flesch. Trying to attack Van der Breggen. Yeah, not her day. Marta Cavalli for Valcar Travel and Service, the Italian, was there, and Lauren Stevens for Team Tibco, who'd done a pretty good job at Brabantse Pijl. She'd been in a breakaway which got closed down by Grace Brown when Grace Brown went past her. So, again, a couple of good time trialists in there. You've got Peters working for Julianne Dor. You've got Kopecky, like Mads Pedersen, probably the quickest rider in that group, but on her own, no other teammates. She rides for Lotto Sudal Ladies. Lisa Brennau, the time trialist, but she got a bit of a sprint as well. And Sarah Roy, who she's going to wait for it to come down to a sprint. That's her best chance if someone makes a mistake, but not a premium sprinter compared to those riders. And then you got Trek, who, I don't know, in a flat sprint, I was saying it at the time, I was saying they should try and work over these other riders pretty early and because that's the strength, I think, of Dijkman. When you've seen Dijkman go clear in races this year and be really dominant, like in Liège, etc., she's gone clear early. And I guess they did try and do that on the Kemmelberg, and riders went with them. It's not a long enough climb. But Trek didn't really try to work the other riders over at all, actually. They were pulling mostly. I think Amy Peters was doing a fair bit of work and Julian Dor was sitting on. Kopecky was pulling sometimes. Vollering was sitting on completely. Dijkman was sitting on, to be honest, but Longo Borghini and Ellen van Dijk were having to work a fair bit. Cavalli sitting on a bit. Brennau. The chase was gaining on them because the front group were a bit dysfunctional. Trek were pulling because I guess it was better than being in a massive group behind and they all coming back together. But then again, they were reluctant to pull Kopecky and Julian Dor to the line as well. And then the other riders didn't really have any teammates. So the gap came down to like 12, 15 seconds, I think, with 6 kilometres to go. The chase group was working well because Sunweb had missed the move, Lippert had crashed at an inopportune time, I think, on the Kemmelberg or just beforehand. And yeah, they're bringing that down. Canyon Schramm had missed the move as well. And then it was attack after attack after attack. And I think it was Ellen van Dijk on the left-hand side. This is all in the last 5 kilometres, and I don't have KM stamps for them all. I'll just do them in sequence. Ellen van Dijk attacking, and then this was really good tactics, actually, from all the riders involved. Obviously, everyone knew the minute Van Dijk attacked, it was going to be Longo Borghini, the second Trek rider, and not their favourite rider, Dijkman. It's going to be Longo Borghini attacking. And Lotte Kopecky was literally glued to Elisa Longo Borghini's wheel when she attacked and was right on it. She didn't even get a gap or even force Kopecky and Julian Dor to chase. You got Amy Peters also then counter-attacking for Bulls Dormans. She did. She was MVP today, in my view, for Gent-Wevelgem Women's. And I don't remember Lisa Brennauer really having a dig, or Dijkman, to be honest. I think Dijkman might have tried, but didn't really make too much of an impression. And then coming into the finish, Amy Peters, who just attacked, by the way, and forced the other riders, Ellen van Dijk, to close her down. And it was a hard chase for Ellen van Dijk, and other riders had to help her because Peters was, I thought she might have even gone clear if everyone looked at each other. And this is now getting into the last kilometre. Peters then really early sacrifices herself, just like Longo Borghini did for Dijkman in the La Course race, which forced Marianne Vos to open up her sprint too early. Amy Peters did exactly the same today for Bulls Dormans, and it forced Lotte Kopecky, Sarah Roy, and Lisa Brennauer to get on her wheel early, and Kopecky in particular to open up her sprint earlier than she would have wanted to, the Belgian. Julian Dor right on Kopecky's wheel, and then stayed in that wheel for ages in the sprint. We're talking like 150, 175 metres, and then in the last 50, 60 metres, she came round Lotte Kopecky pretty easily, actually, and won Gent-Wevelgem for Bulls Dormans and for Belgium, even though Peters is Dutch. But yeah, Belgium missing out in the men's race with Van Aert, etc. Julian Dor doing a magic job. Her 47th pro win. She came second in the Belgian National Champs road race, actually behind Lotte Kopecky, I think in a head-to-head sprint. I haven't seen footage of that, but I remember that was what happened. She's won Driestag Brugge de Pan in 2018. She's won the Bulls Rental Ronde van Drenthe, Flanders Diamond Tour. She's won 3 times. So a good career for Julian Dor, but this was a very big win for her. And also the fact that she didn't really have any good results in La Course, Giro Rosa at all, and she missed out to Kopecky in the road race for the national champs. And then a great team effort from Bulls Dormans and her being able to beat Kopecky, who probably is slightly more talented and faster than her, but hey, teamwork matters a lot, and we saw that today in both the men's and women's race, the women's race in particular, where I think Trek will be going back to the team bus and thinking about what they could have done a little bit differently in that race and maybe using their cards a little bit earlier. And then Bulls Dormans, yeah, I mean, go and watch the last 10Ks. Amy Peters couldn't have done it better. It was incredible from her. And Trek wasn't a howler from Trek, But just like when I thought Van Aert and Turnison might have played their cards, they could have maybe done something a little bit earlier, predicting what was going to happen. I think Trek, when you pull for so long after Kemmelberg, when you pull for 25 kilometres, and then you say to those same riders, Longoborghini and Ellen van Dijk, who've been pulling, oh, by the way, I now want you to attack and get a gap and force Amy Peters, who's maybe just not been pulling as hard, force them to chase and close you down and try and get a big gap on them. You could see when Ellen van Dijk attacked, she was tired, and that's not her fault. It's predictable after pulling in the brakes. So maybe it would have been better to leverage Diagon's ability as a breakaway artist from long range a little bit more, or Longoborghini, especially rather than essentially carrying Lotte Kopecky and Julien Dor to the finale, particularly when Julien Dor had a very strong teammate in Amy Peters. We've seen her in sort of international races, working for the Netherlands as a support rider for Vos and Van Vleuten. So that was women's Gent-Wevelgem. Very interesting last 40 kilometres, I actually thought. And I should read you out the full list. Julien Dor first, Kopecky second, Brennauer third, Sarah Roy fourth. Very good result for the Australian, for Middleton Scott. Marta Cavalli, Italian fifth, Lauren Stevens sixth, Vollering seventh, Diagnan eighth, Gap, Peters ninth, and Lisa Longoborghini. So eighth being the best result for Trek, a bit disappointing. And then I think Lorena Vibes won the bunch sprint for Team Sunweb way back, like 8 seconds back. So yeah, great race for Gent-Wevelgem. Congrats, and a big thank you to Flanders Classics for putting on both of these races under trying conditions, and also no safety concerns that I saw, apart from maybe the crack in the road that took down Rui Oliveira's front wheel. Just a great event and a great advertisement for cycling, both men and women's. But that's enough from Gent-Wevelgem. I'm now going to throw to Benji. He's got his AeroPress 2,000 meter altitude Colombian single origin $50 per kilo bag brewed, and throw to him for Paris Tour.
Okay, that race was much more interesting than I thought it would be. A good 2 years ago, they changed the parkour a bit. It was a more likely sprinter race in the past, and now more of a gravel race. And I think we missed saying that quite a bit in the preview yesterday, so I wanted to say that at the start here. It is more likely to be a rider that is good at gravel sections, and according to a lot of teams, there's luck involved. And I think that the Koenig was the main team that spread those words when the parkour changed, as they even decided to not race it 1 year because it was more based on luck than anything else, which I don't really agree with. Today we saw that the riders we expected up there to be up there, but also with a tiny bit of luck, in the sense that the head favorite that we were speaking about for like 5 minutes yesterday, Søren Kragh Andersen, crashed fairly early on in the stage and never really came into play anymore. I think with about 50k to go, he was on 4 minutes of the front of the race, with a breakaway of Siskevicius, Reinders, Martin Galland, Rikunov, Emile Vermeulen, and Aristi. Now, from all those riders, the strongest one in my eyes is Vermeulen, who has a bit of a sprint, and I think was 27th last year or the year before in this race itself. So he's able to set a mediocre result here. So the others have never really been up there. Siskevicius did get a top 10 at Paris-Roubaix once, though, while the year before, if I recall correctly, he actually was out of time limit. But yeah, that was special. Anyway, the group behind, the peloton group or the elite group, whatever you can call it, was on 1 minute and 10 seconds at that point with 50k to go. And there was a bit of an attack from behind from that elite group. And the likes of Benoit Cosnefroid, who was the second favorite on our podcast yesterday, he attacked away with a group of 5. Casper Pedersen of Sunweb, Rudy Mollard of Groupama, Alexander Krieger, and Quentin Pacher from BNB Vital Concept. That group is honestly pretty strong. I had those riders in my mind, except for Krieger, I think, to be of value in this race. With about 39 kilometers to go, they reached up to like 20 seconds from the first group, with only Reinders and Vermeulen left. All the rest was being left behind between all the groups and moving towards the peloton group at the back, so they didn't really come into play anymore. and one rider decided to attack in that chasing group, and it was Cosnefroid again on every single muddy gravel section. He was the rider in that group that did most of the work. Casper Pedersen as well, being able to follow. Mollard had some trouble, came back a bit, but in the end, never really got away again. And one of his teammates from behind actually tried to save it for Groupama by attacking with Bardet, and Madua is that teammate of Mollard. So Madua, Bardet trying to catch Cosnefroid and Pedersen, who basically just caught the two riders up front, Reinders and Vermeulen, who were unable to follow the pace of Cosnefroid and Pedersen because genuinely Cosnefroid was on fire today. I can't say anything more about it, and Pedersen for sure as well, to be able to follow that monster. And with 20 kilometers to go, two riders left at the front, Cosnefroid, Pedersen, and the group behind, including Madua, Bardet, and three other riders at that point. Nieuwenhuis, a teammate of Casper Pedersen, so he would not be chasing. Vakoc being in there as well for Alpecin Phoenix, and Barguil for Arkea. Those riders were on 34 seconds of the front of the race. With a good 10 kilometers left, that group came closer and closer, 20 seconds. But suddenly, the time gap jumped to 10 seconds. I got scared. I looked behind the first group, did not see anyone in a pretty long straight road. So this time gap was off, in my honest opinion. And a good 2 kilometers later, with like 8 or 7K to go, the gap was suddenly back at like 30 seconds. So to me, it was clear that either the time gap was wrong or I didn't see the riders in that full-on shot. But it was pretty clear that I was going to go to a two-man sprint. Looking at that sprint, I didn't really know who was going to take it because Casper Pedersen has part of the Sunweb lead-out for Kees Bol at the Tour de France as well, and was pretty strong in that. We know he's got a sprint, but Cosnefroid in Brabant-Sapel was not too slow either. I thought during the Brabant-Sapel recap that Cosnefroid should try and trust his sprint a bit more, but today I'm afraid it just wasn't enough. In the last kilometer, we saw that Pedersen was leading it out. He had the confidence, looked behind him every single second, and the moment that Cosnefroid kicked, Pedersen kicked at the same exact moment because he saw that it was going to happen. And maybe it was a bit phoned in by Cosnefroid, but Pedersen was so good at handling that move from Cosnefroid from behind that Cosnefroid never even got past Pedersen. So Pedersen stayed ahead, and he ended up winning Paris Tour in what a wonderful way. Working together with, well, the strongest rider in the race, Cosnefroid for me, but Pedersen just has the better sprint in the end and was able to follow Cosnefroid, so the difference was not that great. All in all, a great race for me. I enjoyed it. I certainly did. It is interesting to see how a lower start field behaves on this kind of parcours with Paris Tour sometimes. Last year, there were better riders than this year because this year Gent-Wevelgem is on the same day, which to my mind are two of the small number of races that include gravel sections. Gent-Wevelgem with those plug streets in the middle, and here with plenty of them along the road. We've got Trobre-Orléans, I think, throughout the season as well, but I love these races, and some people think they don't have a place in cycling. I feel like they do, because it's the riders that decide what skill they want to endorse themselves in cycling, and I feel like this is still a part of road cycling, because the majority of the race is road. With cyclocross, it's the other way around, and sometimes people try and point at this race and say that it's basically a cyclocross race. I think Patrick Lefevre said that once, but I could be wrong in that. But yeah, in the end, I enjoyed it. Very good race. And, well, we were straight off with our picks, I think, because we didn't pick Søren Kragh Andersen because we didn't want to pick a real favorite, but the likes of M. Gent, just Wanty in general, never really came into play. So I feel like that is a team that perhaps were the losers of this Paris Tour, the weaker ones in the race that we expected to be up there. But I think that rounds it up a bit. We don't have any
I picked
interesting
Buhani.
Controversies. You picked Buhani?
I picked Buhani.
He never came into play either.
Yeah, not. I mean, usually if you pick Buhani for like a one pro French one day race, yeah, 50-50, you'll be correct. Not today. I guess the gravel. Yeah, this ain't the race for him. But he's in good form, so keep watching out for our man Nacer Buhani. But yeah, that's a big Super Sunday, and we've tried to do 4 races. We've done it in under an hour and 15 minutes. I'd like to pat ourselves on the back, check out I don't know why I'm telling people to check out the timestamps, because they're obviously at the end of the podcast. Let us know if you like the way Benji and I divided and conquered. I think it added to the sort of the quality of the podcast rather than us just basically reading out official race tickets without having really watched the other races properly. I prefer the way we've done it this way. Thanks as always for your continued support, and let a friend know about the podcast or give us a review on the Apple Store or Apple Podcast Player if you get a chance. Bring on the beef for Tour of Flanders between Mathieu van der Poel and Wout Van Aert, even though they probably don't really have any beef. I'm sure the media, sports are already fanning the flames of that. So go and check out the sports.be website and you'll see it there. Congrats to Ruben Guerrero for getting the W. Congrats to Pedersen. Congrats to Julien Dor and Casper Pedersen. Sad our man Kosnefra couldn't win. Looking forward to the rest day tomorrow. And yeah, thanks for Nicole for supporting our Giro podcast. As always, I'll leave you with one remark. Calma, hoy estoy aquí. Ciao.